Okay, so it looks like we're ready to go on to the levels of organization. So here is a picture that I sent out to you guys to draw and talk about. And here it shows the 6 levels. So let's go through these really quick. So the lower levels of organization I talked about in Unit 1, where how life starts as a cell. Cells combine into tissues. Tissues combine into organs. Organs can combine into organ systems. And then at some level in there, we'll get the organism. So there are some organisms that are just one cell, like certain algae and amoebas, and then there's certain organisms that go through all the levels and have a bunch of complicated organ systems, like humans, or in this case, I sometimes think this is a reindeer, maybe some kind of deer, or stag, because that's the term for like a male deer. And so with the upper levels, we've now gone through those lower steps and we've reached the organism level. And then we go from there. So here in the upper levels. So here we have our individual deer. The next level up is all the deer in a certain area. That represents the population. The next level up is the community. The community is all the organisms, all the populations, I should say, in a certain area. And that's not just the animals like the moose and the rabbit, but all the plants, all the fungus, all these things in the soil, worms and bugs and bacteria and all sorts of microscopic stuff. Not just the big cool animals, as we'll talk about, the microscopic stuff that we don't even really notice or often think about is actually doing some really incredibly important stuff, which we talked about early in the year when we did our endangered species project. The next level up is the ecosystem, which includes all the non-living or abiotic factors like the water, and that's why they suddenly have the water there, or the air, or even the rocks and things that organisms need. And then they also added some more animals here. And then the next level up from an ecosystem is a biome, which is basically kind of a huge chunk of the earth where they have a lot of similar ecosystems. And in this case, you can see it's kind of connected. And then all the biomes and all the life on earth are what we call the biosphere, which to me is incredibly important because we have no proof that anywhere else in the universe exists life, at least that we're aware of and are being told about. If there's people that know that aliens exist or something, we don't. They're not talking about it. But sometimes kids bring up questions on these. When we talk about the biosphere, like, what about life on other planets? And well, I personally can't speak to that. So as far as I know, the Earth is a very small place in a very gigantic universe, and it's the only place we know of that has life. So I think that makes it incredibly precious and important, and that something we need to protect, as we'll talk about. Okay. All right, so let's start. We're going to use a lion as our individual organism. So not much really to say about that. You guys know what organisms are. It's a living thing. So we're going to start with our one individual organism. Then we will move up to, well, or not. Okay, the population, which is a group of the same species living together. So here we have a little population of lions, and then there's a couple cubs hiding in the grass here, which shows how well camouflaged they are. And usually we won't study an individual organism if we go back here, unless they have some really weird, rare disease, or if they're like the last of their species, like what you have with some rhinos right now, where I think there's only one rhino left of a certain species. I think it's the white rhino or the northern square-lipped rhino. There's probably some kids listening to this right now that did that animal for their research projects and know what I'm talking about. So then those individuals become incredibly important and protected and studied. But normally we'll start our studies at the population level. So when population sizes are not at a healthy level, that's when we start talking about animal endangerment and things like that. All right, but we're going to focus more on the community level. So as I said, the community, that is all the different, let's let it keep going, populations that live together in a specific environment. So we were building around our lion. So now we have some other animals in Africa, and then there's other stuff. There's stuff in the soil. Here we see the grass. There's bugs in the fur of the giraffe. There's going to be bacteria in the mouth of this lizard. There's all sorts of stuff within the community that often is overlooked because as humans, we often look at cool animals or even maybe the trees and stuff, but we often overlook almost everything else. And there's a lot of important organisms within these communities that maybe aren't noticeable or noticed. All right, there's a couple important community factors, and so We start with community roles. So communities are balanced between organisms with different niches and different roles, and we studied niches in Unit 4. So I'm not going to necessarily go over old stuff, so if you need to look up terminology, look at your old notes. Whoops. So, for instance, a lot of people get grossed out by worms, but worms can play important roles in the community. They can provide food for other organisms. They also they might get rid of like gross stuff and maybe even consume some poop and things. And they also move through the soil, which lets oxygen move through the soil and helps plants. So worms, although maybe gross to some people, can play some really important roles. And then mushrooms are a fungus, but actually the mushroom isn't really the main fungus. The fungus is down here under the ground, and it's recycling nutrients, giving them to the soil so that the soil can help plants grow, and then when the plants die, now the fungus gets food again, and that is a very perfect example of the circle of life. Fungus provide nutrients to the soil by decomposing dead organisms, which lets new organisms grow, and then when they die, the fungus does it again, and it becomes the circle of life, as they say in The Lion King. All right, let's talk about some of the roles they play. So producers are organisms that produce chemical energy and oxygen from non-living substances. And so everybody's familiar with plants, but actually, as I mentioned in one of the other videos, or this one, can't remember, algae is believed to be making half of the Earth's oxygen, as you saw in the coral reef video. Just a small, like 2 degrees increase of ocean temperature will cause algae to die. And that is, to me, the main concern with global warming, more than other things they talk about, like ice caps melting and hurricanes and other issues. I think we need to start talking about losing these really critical producers, like algae, in the ocean from the warming temperatures and protect them, and then obviously protect our forests and our plant life as well, so we can get our food energy and our oxygen, not just for ourselves, but for all living things on Earth. All right, there's 2 ways of producing energy, and we've obviously studied photosynthesis already, but another method is called chemosynthesis, which is pretty cool, and we would not even know this existed if we did not have submarines that can take us to the bottom of the ocean. So in some areas in the ocean, there is no sunlight, so there is no chance of photosynthesis. So they figured they're not going to really find a lot of life when they go down there, but maybe they'll find some things kind of roaming around. And instead they found in some areas these really complex, really weird and cool communities of life. And what they are is there's these openings in the earth where all this hot material comes out. They're called volcanic vents. And there's bacteria that have evolved to use the heat, as well as some chemicals like hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide, to create carbohydrates. And then little microorganisms can survive off the bacteria, larger organisms can survive off those, and actually we get a pretty complex community of life. These worms here in these pictures, really hard to tell. They live in these tubes, but you can see the red is them coming out, like right here. They're like 10 feet long. So these are enormous animals. And they're not skinny. I think they're pretty wide, like maybe a baseball bat or something, but 10 feet long. You can see there's some crabs down here and some other sort of like shell, I don't know, clams or something. There's a fish down here. And people were blown away, and this really changed our view of the Earth, and this is where, and how life can exist. And this is where people say maybe there are places in the universe where actually there is life, but it's hidden. And they say that even about our solar system. And usually this is where I would ask the class, does anybody know one of the moons in our solar system that they think might have something like chemosynthesis happening? And usually somebody knows. And there is a moon around Saturn that's covered in ice, and it is called Europa. And there is hypothesis that under the ice on Europa could be chemosynthetic organisms with their own food chains and food webs and communities of life, and we just can't see them. So I don't think we should be spending time trying to go to Mars. I think it would actually be a lot cooler to go to Europa and send some drills with some cameras or whatever technology down through that ice and see if they find something cool. All right, I feel like that was probably, I got to start setting a timer, but that one felt like probably I should stop there. So, and then I'll make another one.